is Property Question Time with me, Emily Evans. This is the show where you get to ask our panel of experts your questions. Our panel of experts today are Paul Higgs, CEO of the Millbank Group, James Jenkins, financial advisor of Money Sprite, and Simon Zutshi, the founder of the Property Investors Network. Welcome. Right, so first of all, I'm going to start off with you, Simon. So, a bit of a long question. How to Brexit-proof my portfolio? I have just heard some analyses of the probable impact of Brexit on various sectors of the UK economy. For each sector, the forecasts are alarming. Only government bureaucracy seems likely to grow in the short term, and I cannot see a way to invest to benefit from this. Short of offshoring my entire portfolio or concentrating on the FTSE 100, who earn most of their income from abroad, are there any strategies to mitigate the likely losses and perhaps even benefit a little?
Okay, my first thing would be don't panic. Nobody knows what the impact of Brexit is going to be. But let's look at some fundamentals. So if they've got an investment portfolio in the UK, the good thing is it's in sterling. If you have overseas properties and they're in different currencies, leaving and finally exiting Europe might have an impact on currencies. We've already had a hit on the pound when we voted to leave the European Union anyway. So that's kind of already happened and may well recover. But going back to the UK, we live on this little island and we have a limited supply of accommodation. And one of the things that has boosted population growth, which has obviously boosted rents and values of property, is the increasing immigration. Now, if that were to completely stop, and I think some people thought that when we voted to leave Europe, they would bring up the drawbridge and no one would ever come in again. And they forgot about this free trade arrangement where people can move. The government has already said they don't really want all the European people to go back to Europe. And I'm sure they don't want all the people who are English and British in Europe to come back. So there's going to be a status quo. And even if there was no more immigration into the UK, we still have an increasing population, which means we don't have enough accommodation. So over the long term, rents and values of property should continue to go up. So rather than do anything drastic and worry about things we cannot control, I would suggest focus on things we can control. So when you're investing in property, make sure you buy in areas with strong rental demand. Don't try and pick where the next hotspot's going to be because you're going to never really tell. I believe it's all about renting property out, getting a great cash flow now, make sure you're going to be able to rent it in the future so that the tenants are covering the cost of the mortgage and the insurance and the management fee. You have some extra cash left over, which you have to pay tax on, but that's the fundamental way to invest in property. And I really wouldn't worry about things we can't control.
I think a lot of landlords are also worrying about all the new legislation that's coming in with regards to tax implications. Obviously now landlords have to pay a lot more stamp duty land tax.
Absolutely.
So people are worrying and thinking, oh, it's not as good to be a landlord. But at the end of the day, you know, with the growth of property prices, it's still going to be.
Yeah, I would suggest that things have changed. And as professional investors, we have to accept the market does change. And we have to adapt to those things. And it's people who panic and jump out of the market who might make a decision. I still believe the long-term benefit of property is in the long-term growth. And so as long as you can afford to hold the asset by renting it out and having someone else cover the costs, that's the most important thing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so second question, James. I've had an email from a mortgage underwriter saying my mortgage has been approved subject to the valuation report. The mortgage valuation is next week. Does this mean if the valuation goes smoothly, I will receive an offer and no further documents will be reviewed or required? Am I more than likely to receive an offer? Does anybody know how long it takes from valuation to offer? And this is with the Leeds Building Society.
Okay, well it sounds a bit like sort of a classic where somebody's gone directly to a lender to arrange their own mortgage as opposed to potentially through a mortgage broker. The mortgage broker would be answering those questions for you, no problem at all. And if you weren't entirely clear, you can pick the phone up to them and ask them the question. Mortgage underwriters at lenders are far more sort of unknown creatures that sort of live in the dark and nobody's allowed to talk to. You know, we have enough problems mortgage brokers talking to them, so as a member of the public, you're going to struggle a bit more. So it sounds like they've gone direct, which is why they've got a lot of questions around what actually is happening and what the process is. Obviously, without knowing anything about that person's case and where they are, it's very difficult to answer her specific question. But generically, if a mortgage is approved subject to valuation, it means it's approved subject to valuation. So that is the last thing outstanding. Now, with Leeds, that may not necessarily be the case. But generally speaking, if a mortgage underwriter has said, yes, we're all happy, just a survey to go, then that means they've signed off all the documents, assuming the client sent in any payslips, bank statements that the lender's requested. So it should be the case. Once the valuation's back, generally speaking, it goes back into an underwriting queue. And that underwriting queue, depending on the lender, can be anything from 24 hours to 2 weeks, depending on which mortgage lender it is. A good indication would be how long since she sent her documents in, did that client get the answer from the underwriter that it's been approved subject to valuation. And if that was 5 days, then she's fairly well safe to assume that once the valuation's been done, that the surveyor normally has the valuation back with the lender within 24, 48 hours, and then it'll go into the underwriting queue. So it took them 5 days to underwrite the documents. Assume 5 days it's going to take to get the answer on the mortgage. That's just a general rule of thumb. Leads, I think, generally are somewhere between 48 and 72 hours normally to process documentation, but busy times like it is at this time of year, it could be up to 5 days. But just try and think back to what she got when she sent documents in as to, that'll give her a rough idea.
But ultimately, it should have known all of that. It should have instructed an independent mortgage advisor.
Yes, and if she has used a mortgage broker and she's still got those questions, she needs to be talking to the mortgage broker, because that's our job, is to keep the client informed and give them timescales.
You're worth your money. Yeah. Brilliant, thank you very much. Right, so final question for you, Paul. My neighbour's deeds and my deeds show a strip of land which years ago was shared between the houses. Oh, land is always one of those dodgy questions, isn't it? Though technically it's part of their land and I have access rights. We mutually want to make it mine, as a fence was erected 15 years ago to divide the land, and we are both happy with each bit. That's quite lucky, isn't it? Is there an easy way to do this without paying £900 for a solicitor to do it? Is there a way of claiming it as it's had a fence up for 15 years?
Yeah. Okay, so after land has been used and occupied by an owner unobstructed for more than 11 years, there is potentially, you could go for what's called adverse possession, okay? Effectively means filling out a few forms, marking up a few plans. It then goes to the land registry, who, if it's uncontested, as it will be here because they have a mutual agreement, you can then get what's called possessory title. So it sounds as if that could be the easiest thing to do, not necessarily the quickest, because it's got to go through a backwards and forwards process, and then even after the 11th year, you've got to wait a little bit longer. But that's the way to do it. In terms of saving 900 quid, yes and no. I mean, you could attempt to understand and fill the forms out yourself. It's not too difficult, to be quite honest. But, you just need to bear in mind, if you want to try to do legal things, yourself, it could end up costing you more in the long run. So
just looking at it from another point of view here, what happens if they haven't got the consent from the other? How do you do how people do land grabs all the time? How do you prove that it's been yours for 11 years? Yeah,
so it's interesting. So I've done this quite a lot over the years. It used to be 12 years actually. So what used to happen is if you've owned it for 12 years or more, uncontested, and you can prove it, that's it, you've automatically got it. The rules changed a few years ago, so it's now after 11 years, you effectively have to go looking for whoever the real beneficial owner might be, and only then can you potentially get adverse possession after another year. So at the end of the day, it's a matter of fact. It's a case of proving it. Could be satellite photos, could have been evidence from neighbours. Usually you'll have to get what's called a statutory declaration, so it's like a legal promise to prove or confirm that you did hold it or own it, what you were doing on it for 12 or more years. So, that's the way you do it. Goes to the land registry. The land registry looks at all of the evidence. If they agree with your case, you ultimately get what's called possessory title. So,
wonderful.
I think that's one of the things that does frustrate me probably most in the whole property industry is the professionals are there to do a job and they do the job properly. And I think something you touched on there was, if we're talking about £900 to do the job correctly with someone who knows what they're doing, as opposed to sort of trying to bluff and find your way through it, the land registry will kick it back if it's wrong, and you'll be backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. For a cost of 900 quid, you can get it done, know it's right, because the biggest problem will be not now, it's as you alluded to, when you want to come and sell it. And if you've done it wrong at that point, it's going to cost you more money to put it right when you try and sell that piece of land with the land you're trying to sell now. Like, I guess, the previous question, potentially not used a professional mortgage broker. here we're looking at maybe not using a professional conveyancer to do the job properly. We're all here to make things right and do the job properly for you, so that you end up owning property and land and being able to sell it without issues. Yes, it costs money, because people to do the job properly costs money. In this case, £900 is money well spent. Would be money well spent in my opinion, to get that bit right.
And it's worth adding, actually, even when you are using proper experts, so lawyers for example, they're not all good at everything. So, you know, it's not like you could just walk down the high street, find any lawyer, and they're necessarily going to understand this stuff and be good at this stuff. So, you know, whatever it is you're doing, I think with any professionals, you need to make sure they've actually got experience in that particular area that you need it.
Great. Thank you for that advice. That's brilliant. Right, okay, so to end this, so I think you have a golden nugget for us, Simon.
Yes, I do. And I think it's really important when, we kind of touched on it earlier, that when people are looking to invest in property, you've got two types of property owners. You've got people who just have their own home, which is their residence, and they make certain decisions based on that. You know, they might pay slightly more because they're emotionally attached to it. But when you buy an investment property, it's just that. It's an investment, and you should really make sure you don't get emotionally attached to it. It is all about the numbers, and it's about doing your research, checking the numbers are great, making sure it's making money for you now. And to do that, linking to what we said earlier, get the right team involved. If you have a property investment, that is a business, and you need to treat it as a business. And too many people treat investing as a hobby, and they get hobbyist results. If you have a business, you have to invest. You have to spend money with the right professionals. The point about using the right mortgage broker, again, people think, oh, I'll just speak to my bank and see if they can give me a mortgage. And their bank says, I can't give you a mortgage. And they think, oh, so I can't invest. Whereas actually there might be some lenders based on the circumstances who could actually give them a mortgage, but only will you get the answer from a fully independent mortgage broker. So it's about seeking the right professionals to ask the right questions, and they'll tell you what you should be asking, get their advice, be prepared to pay for that, and it's an investment that's going to pay off many, many times over, because the long-term value of property is holding it, as we've mentioned earlier, so you want to get it right and make sure you're doing things properly so you're protected.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, that's all we have time for now, but please stay with us and we'll be straight back after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time with me, Emily Evans. Today I am with our panel of experts, and I have Paul Higgs, James Jenkins and Simon Zutshi. Thank you for being with us today. So, first question I have is for you, Simon. I wonder what the best freely available tools are to analyse investment portfolios. I have played with Morningstar's Stocks and Share portfolio tool and note some of the features are available on an additional subscription. Are there better free tools available based on this forum member's experience, and do any provide or highlight areas for potential rebalancing?
I think it's really important to make a distinction between a share portfolio and a property portfolio. Shares, you might have lots and lots of shares to spread the risk. Property, you might have 5 properties. So the best way to analyse a portfolio is to have a spreadsheet and to basically list in that the details. I have a spreadsheet where I have, you know, the address of the property, who the mortgage lender is, what the interest rate is, what type of property it is, what I bought it for, what I think it's worth now, what the rent is, etc., etc. And so as the market changes, I can look each year at my portfolio, which ones have performed, are the ones that have had more void periods where you've got no tenants, are the ones that have performed particularly well, should I put the rents up, what's the return on investment I'm getting, and it really is a property by property analysis. And those are fundamental things that any investor should really know how to do. And it's just keep an eye on your portfolio, and occasionally you might decide to sell a property. So, for example, with the recent tax changes, for the last 2 years, I've been selling a few of my properties and reinvesting the money in better performing properties, larger houses of multiple occupation, those kind of things. So I'm always looking, every 6 months, I look at my portfolio and balance it, but it's not quite the same as shares. So it's not the same analysis tool you'd use.
Okay, fantastic.
The important bit there is to note it's not an internet tool that's giving him the answer, which I think is what the question is about. You know, is there an internet tool that can give me the amazing answer? Well, no, it isn't, because property is very individual.
Yeah.
It's very individual to area. It's very specific to what you can see and is going on in the real world. So I think, as Simon said, is get your head around the spreadsheet and you balance it. You look at what's working and what isn't.
Yeah. And if you're looking to buy a portfolio, exactly the same thing. You need a spreadsheet from the owner with all those details, and you can go through each one and make sure, is it in a good area? Does it rent well? What's the track record? What's the cash flow? And then work out, is that a good thing? And within, if you're buying a portfolio, there'll be some that are better than others, and you just need to take an overall assessment. Is it worth me buying that portfolio or not?
Right, James, next question for you, and it's a bit of a long one, I'm afraid. I bought a house in June with my partner for £425,000 in London, and our mortgage is £318,000. Our mortgage payments are about the same as we were paying in rent, but we have over 3 times the space now. Yes, this is a huge mortgage. No, we don't make a lot, but the time came for us to buy instead of rent. Very sensible. Plan. Call bank tomorrow and see if I can round up our mortgage, which will cut off 2 years from the term. 2, get £10,000 in savings again as an emergency fund before overpaying the mortgage, as they don't have any money at the moment. And 3, get a tenant in from November the 1st and rent the second bedroom for hopefully £700 a month and apply that as overpayments. What should I do?
Okay, it's difficult first of all to try and work out what actually their problem is or what they want to try and achieve, and therefore the advice could be different. Take each part as it is, I guess. They're obviously renting and buying, their monthly costs are going to be the same. So I'm assuming it's not a case of we're struggling monthly or we can't make ends meet or whatever, because they're talking about overpayments. So I'm assuming that comfortably affording this mortgage. I'm always a big advocate for having some money in savings, an emergency fund. So it doesn't need to be, it might not need to be £10,000, it could be 3,000, 4,000, whatever. So I would say before we start really chucking money at the mortgage or whatever, is maybe look to try and establish some kind of emergency fund. That's just safety net for yourself. But again, it doesn't sound like they're overly stretched to do the mortgage, so maybe the emergency fund isn't as important, but I would look to do that first. Knocking 2 years off the mortgage, saving any time off your mortgage is a good thing, subject to you being able to comfortably afford the mortgage payment. What I would do is if you're going to phone the mortgage lender to reduce the term, is to try and make sure that you're doing it as overpayments per month as opposed to increasing the monthly payment. What that basically means is it's giving you a bit of flex over if your monthly payment is £1,000 a month and to knock 2 years off is going to cost you £1,100 a month, then try and do it that you keep the same monthly payment of £1,000 and overpay £100 a month, because you can do that via standing order, and then if you need to save that money back, you can stop it at any point, so you can stop and start that overpayment. The third part is probably really, really subjective as to whether you get someone in to rent a room or not. And take the financial side of it. If someone's going to give you £700 a month to rent a room from you and you can pay that off your mortgage, that makes great sense. It's financially, it's a very sound idea. Whether you should do it or not, I guess, is down to whether that's the way you want to live. I think subjectively, personally for me, that's not a way I would want to live. I'd want to be able to afford the mortgage and afford the property in my own right without relying on a third party living in my house paying me the money, but I'm pretty sure that's not how everybody would view it.
Yeah, well, I would come in on that and say that actually that's how I started. When I bought my very first house, I bought a house bigger than I needed, and I rented 2 of the rooms to friends of mine who are still studying at university, and the rent they paid pretty much covered the mortgage and most of the bills. And actually there's a government incentive called Rent a Room Scheme, where you can rent a room in your own home and you can get £7,500 of income completely tax-free. So if you put that towards your mortgage, that's quite a significant chunk of your mortgage paid. So as you quite rightly said, if your lifestyle suits and you don't mind living with other people, actually I think that's a great idea, and it helps the kind of the housing crisis in the UK as well. Tax-free for you, so if it works for you, I'd definitely do that. That's how I started. And I think that's actually a good way for people to get onto the ladder, rather than just living on your own. Actually, if you have to share with someone else, I think that's a compromise you make to actually then own. I think sometimes people, they don't want to rent anymore, but they want to have their own place, but they can't afford it. Well, this is a way to compromise and get your foot on the ladder and make it far more affordable.
I think it's exactly that. It's a subjective thing as to whether or not...
It is, yeah.
And I guess the answer could be, because there is clearly financial benefits to doing it, what we do is make sure you don't set your finance up in such a way that you're dependent on that income potentially. No. So that it's always extra bonus. Because let's say you do it, and you go for that route because of the benefits, because of the financial, and it does make financial sense. 6 months down the line, it's been an absolute disaster. You want to be able to pull out of that, go back to how you were, and not negatively impact your benefits. In the meantime, you've made money and you've paid that off your mortgage. Fantastic news. But I would be, if it's the first time you're doing it, looking at shorter term commitments on it, and not setting your own commitments around having that income. Because if you haven't got a tenant in there, you've got to find that money in the meantime. So it's for me, I would have it as bonus money and see how it works.
I think that's very wise. And actually, when getting a mortgage, the lender would want to make sure you can afford it yourself anyway. So what you say is absolutely right.
Yeah.
Treat it as a bonus. And actually, that might be a way of building up a bit of a cash buffer, because I completely agree. Having some money put aside for unexpected things is a really good thing to have.
Also, just a quick note, you would need to inform your mortgage lender that you're going to be renting a room out.
Yes.
Yeah,
So that you can get their consent to do that, because there'll be a form, and that's protecting the mortgage lender and you to a degree, the consent. So just make sure you do check with the mortgage lender if that's the route you want to go.
So 3 good routes to follow then, really.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, okay, so final question is for you, Paul. I have found a boarded up site where I want to contact the owner. I have looked at the online land registry, but the registered address is the same address as the boarded up property. How can I track down who the owner is?
Okay, so I don't know how they have tried so far, but one of the things I do is exactly that. I find land and buildings with development potential, and I approach the owners direct. So even though it may not be apparent that anyone's living there, if it's boarded up, the mail may well be getting forwarded on, so they should write there anyway. You never know. There are various other things you can do. Talking to the neighbours is usually a good one, particularly older people. They like to chat. I don't really know what the story is there, but obviously if they're thinking of development, when you're turning up talking to the neighbours, it's probably best not to do it in your Range Rover. You might be just trying to, just have a little chat. Detective work, basically. Bit of Googling. If the worst comes to the worst and you can't get any interest, putting up a for sale sign on the property with your number, that tends to get the owners ringing you.
Wow.
Or even parking a caravan on there, that also tends to get the owners finding you. Those last two I should add up, partly tongue-in-cheek, and that sort of last resort stuff, but things like that does tend to flush people out of the woodwork.
It does work. It does work, that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do please keep your questions coming in. Please send them via our website, www.property-tv.co.uk, or email them through to info@property-tv.co.uk. Thank you to our panel of experts, Paul Higgs, James Jenkins, and Simon Zutshi, who are today's panel of experts. From me, Emily Evans, see you soon.